Bermuda. I traveled to Bermuda on an Oceania cruise ship. This was the final destination of a long cruise that traveled to Scotland, Faro Islands, Greenland, Iceland, Canada, the US, and finished in Bermuda. I discovered when I boarded the ship that the cruise I had booked was also advertised as two separate cruises, a Vikings crossing and Bermuda Pallet. Most of the passengers going to Bermuda got on the ship in Boston, so I was one of the few that had taken the very long journey. We had encountered somewhat horrible weather throughout the 25-day cruise, so I was looking forward to the sunny and warm weather of Bermuda. But wait, not so fast. It rained all 3 of the days I was in Bermuda. Sigh. It didn't stop me from traveling all over the islands, though, and there were certainly moments of sun that peeked through the clouds. During our 3 days in Bermuda, we were supposed to dock in 2 ports, St. George and Hamilton. But because of the weather, we only docked in Hamilton. This isn't a huge issue since it is easy to get from one end of the islands to the other. However, it consumed more time in travel. We arrived in Bermuda around 1 p.m., and it was a beautiful cruise into the port, with numerous attractive buildings lining the shore. You could also see the very clear turquoise water in some of the bays. We docked right in the heart of downtown Hamilton, so it was a simple walk across the street to shops and restaurants. I had an excursion booked at 2:30 to visit the Crystal Caves and Tuckertown Drive. Since we had docked in Hamilton instead of St. George, where the Crystal Caves are, it took us about an hour to get to the caves. I didn't mind taking the time to drive because it gave me the opportunity to see the various areas of the islands. I had to marvel at the white-roofed homes, which are covered with a limestone composite. I learned that the roofs all collect water that filters into cisterns underneath the homes. In this way, every house has its own water system. Otherwise, you would have to ship the water in. The roofs are not only attractive, but simple and functional engineering. We eventually reached Crystal Caves. I visited a few caves during my travels, but have to say I thought these were the most beautiful. You walked a fairly steep path to get down to an underground lake, walking by numerous crystallized stalactites and stalagmites, which were illuminated for added drama. Once at the bottom, you reached absolutely crystal clear water. You could see the stalagmites building up beneath the surface, as well as the reflection of the stalactites above. It was stunningly beautiful. The water was so blue. After our tour, we boarded the small bus again. Since we had eaten up so much time getting to the caves, we didn't have much time for the rest of the itinerary. We made a quick stop along the coast at John Smith Bay to take some pictures of the beautiful beach and rocky coastline. Then we just drove through the town of St. George, which I vowed to return to later. We also drove to Tuckertown Drive. We didn't see much, but it is basically a neighborhood of expensive homes and estates, so I wasn't disappointed we didn't stay long. Rather than go on board the ship to eat an included dinner, I decided to try some of the local fare. I found a restaurant that had a lovely balcony overlooking the coastline. I can't say that the food was great, but it had a splendid atmosphere. I then wandered the Hamilton streets a bit before returning to the ship. The next morning I headed directly to the visitors center, which was only a block from the ship. I wanted to get some maps and advice about ferries and buses. I had done some research and discovered ferries that would take you to the tip of the island. The visitor center opened at 9 a.m., so I arrived right at 9. Unfortunately, the ferry building opened earlier, and the ferry I wanted was taking off as I arrived. The next ferry wasn't for another 90 minutes, so I headed on foot to the Bermuda Underwater Exploration Institute. The Institute's mission is to nurture an appreciation for the ocean around Bermuda. When you first walk in, you are confronted by a giant squid above your head. The entire museum was a wonderful diversion with numerous fascinating and educational displays. My favorite room had some amazing examples of different types of shells, really spectacular specimens. They also had a room that reminded me of the Star Wars ride at Disney World. It took you on a journey under the sea. I'm sure kids love it. I didn't have time to linger, but was glad I made the effort to visit. It was certainly a state-of-the-art center that did justice to its mission of ocean appreciation. I walked back to the ferry port and hopped on a ferry to the Royal Naval Dockyard. Since it was raining pretty heavily, everyone stayed inside the ferry boat cabin. However, I wanted to take some pictures, so I stepped outside and up some stairs to a top deck. I don't think people realized that part of the upper deck was covered, so I ended up with the entire upper deck to myself and had a wonderful ride to our destination. The Royal Naval Dockyards were established by the British Royal Navy. Bermuda was a strategic mid-Atlantic location to anchor and maintain the Navy's fleet. Today, the area is an entire complex with cafes, shops, trampoline park, golf, the National Museum of Bermuda, and Dolphin Quest. It was still raining heavily, so I headed first to the museum. I had to pay a small fee to enter. It encompassed several buildings with various naval and military displays. I spent most of my time exploring the fortification wall. You could walk into these small rooms and see where they would fire cannons. There were little alcoves that had me wondering if they were for hiding, hunkering down, or stashing items. As you walk along the rim, you can see how very thick the walls are. It all looked pretty impenetrable to me. There were examples of cannons and cannonballs scattered along the wall. And there were some fine views from the top. You can see how windy and rainy it was that day. I then walked to the commissioner's house, which gave more information on the slave trade and the dockyard's history. On another part of the compound was a section called Prisoners in Paradise. Its displays recall that Bermuda was once a penal colony for British convicts and World War POWs. I then headed to Dolphin Quest. When I arrived, the dolphins were being fed and were darting about in the pool. I understand you can swim with the dolphins, but this wasn't going to happen for me in this weather. There was a pretty awesome playground for kids here. I then left this side of the area to see what else there was to discover. There was the Clock Tower Mall, a craft market, and some other shops, including this Bermuda Triangle shop. In other words, it was a very touristy area. I decided to take the bus back towards Hamilton and just hop off if I saw something I wanted to explore. Unfortunately, the bus driver was grumpy and unhelpful, and when I saw something interesting, I had already passed it. So I went back to Hamilton, ate some lunch, and then headed out by bus again, this time with a specific destination. Even though it was still raining, I decided I wanted to see the famous pink sand beach of Horseshoe Bay. I most likely would not be back to Bermuda again, so I didn't want to miss it. When I got on the bus, this time I had a helpful driver who said she would tell me when to get off. It was the best decision of my trip. By the time I took the long stairs down to the beach, it had stopped raining. There were only a few surfers out taking advantage of the waves. Otherwise, I had the entire beach to myself. I'm sure because people were avoiding the beach because of the rain. I walked from one end of the beach to the other and discovered some absolutely beautiful coves. The sand didn't exactly look pink to me, but it sure was pretty. Here are a few more images of the bay. This was definitely one of the highlights of my trip, partly because it was so isolated that day. I hiked back uphill to the bus stop and took the next bus back to the ship. For my last day in Bermuda, I only had until 1 p.m. before I had to be back on board the ship. I felt like I had covered the island pretty thoroughly, except for St. George, so I took a bus all the way there. St. George isn't a huge town, but it has some noteworthy sights. There is a small peninsula that juts out into the water with this park and this thought-provoking statue of Sir George Somers. There is a plaza near there, which seems to be a hub for tourists to meet up. A corridor of shops and cafes extend parallel to the coast from there. Also nearby is the St. Peter's Chapel that has architectural interest. Love the wooden pews and rafters. The best part of my visit to St. George was to the unfinished church. It is a roofless ruin of a neo-Gothic stone church that was partially built in the late 1800s but never completed. It was a short hike up a hill, but worth the exercise. The ruins are majestic, and the grounds in and around the ruins are quite lush. And as typical around Bermuda, there were some roosters wandering around. On the way back down, I discovered more churches, including the all-pink Salvation Army Church and the attractive Stella Marie's Parish. There was also a small central park for resting and reflection. That finished my touring, but I want to mention one other noteworthy site in Bermuda, moon gates. These are round openings often found along garden walls, which are made of local limestone. Legend says that walking through them brings good luck, which is why it's common to see newlyweds kissing or posing under these stone passageways. So if you want good luck, you'll want to look up some of the moon gate locations in Bermuda. I truly enjoyed my 3 days in Bermuda, and even though 2 of them were half days, I felt like I was able to cover the islands and see all the highlights. Yes, it would have been nice to have great weather, but I've learned that you have to embrace whatever weather you get. I wouldn't have had the magical time at Horseshoe Bay if it wasn't for the unpredictable weather. This was the final destination of a 25-day cruise. I have posted videos of all the other destinations on this trip and have left links in the description below. If you have questions, feel free to ask in the comments section. For senior and solo travelers, check out the Senior Solo Travel website and the Facebook forum, where you can interact with other travelers. I have included links to both in the description. And if you'd like to follow my senior and solo travel journeys, please like and subscribe. Next stop, Amsterdam.